can't stand watching the news anymore. It's all bad. A few of the headlines from this past week nearly pushed me over the edge. Climate change feels more real than ever, with California practically being washed out to sea. My friends say that what we are seeing on TV is very real. And even with all the floods, that water doesn't alleviate the drought because the ground is overly saturated. And the only bright spot is that maybe the increased snowpack in the mountains will help come spring. Fingers crossed. Not Jewish, I know. The airline delays, either due to weather or the FAA's computer glitch, nearly ruined everyone's plans. Bright spot, for the most part, Wednesday's delay only set folks back a few hours. Rabbi Yedwab was scheduled to fly out to see his precious granddaughter in New York, and when I texted him to see about his flight, he reported it was still on time, calling it the luck of the Jewish. But then the morning news took me back to the University of Idaho and the murder of 4 college students. That story hits a lot closer to home now that I have a college student. There's no bright spot here, even though they have arrested a suspect. This week, a 6-year-old shot his teacher at school. I'm horrified at the conditions of women in Iran, Afghanistan, and other places prohibited from going to school, imprisoned for not wearing a hijab. No bright spot in either of these. I'm just appalled. The growing anti-Semitism in this country and around the world, which I'm trying to explain to my students and to my children, but I hardly understand it myself, not to mention racism and hate in general. I don't know about a bright spot for this topic. Honestly, I didn't think that we would see this kind of hate again in our generation. I had hoped that people would have learned from the past, but it just feels like we are repeating the past over and over again. And in that same vein, there's American politics. What could we possibly say about that in polite company? There's nothing. And Israeli politics, don't even get me started. I can barely stand either one. And let's not forget COVID, the flu, RSV. It hasn't gone away as much as we want it to. And then I found out that the streaming is down tonight. But there is a bright spot. We're recording it, and it will be posted later. I really just want to turn off the news and watch Netflix. I'd even watch cat videos at this point because it's impossible to endure all this bad news, even with a bright spot here and there. Beyond the headlines, they come with this feeling of complete vulnerability and total loss of control. I mean, what's next? Frogs, locusts, hail? Actually, there could be hail. Ironically, this week we start reading the book of Exodus. And while we don't reach the 10 plagues in this first Torah portion, Shemot, it does set the stage. Remember, a Pharaoh arose who knew not Joseph. Clearly, a significant period of time has passed since the Pharaoh of Joseph's time had welcomed them to Egypt. And over the course of these years, the Israelites grew numerous and filled the land so much so that the Pharaoh is afraid, not only afraid, but threatened, and responds with persecution and slavery, setting taskmasters over them in forced labor. And if slavery were not enough, the Pharaoh enacts the most severe punishment, the killing of all baby boys. But the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, defy the Pharaoh's order. And when the Pharaoh calls them out for their insubordination, they explain, the Hebrew women are just not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before we can get to them, they have given birth. These 2 midwives are incredible women who outrightly disregard the Pharaoh and as a result, literally save the people of Israel. I'm surprised more girls aren't named after them. Can you imagine a granddaughter named Puah? And notice that in a Torah that doesn't highlight women very often, there are five women introduced in this Torah portion, and each one plays a big part in the story of the Exodus. There's Shiphrah and Puah, the midwives. There's Miriam and her mother Yocheved. There's even Pharaoh's there's six women, Shiphrah and Puah, Miriam and her mother Yocheved, Pharaoh's own daughter Batshah, and Zipporah, Moses' wife. All are named, all are significant, and each one in her own way rebels against the Pharaoh and ultimately crushes the Egyptian empire. I love them. They are my heroines. And surprisingly, even as biblical women, they could be equally at home in modernity. One feminist interpreter, Susan Niditch, notes in the Women's Torah commentary how the women collaborate across ethnic, class, and religious lines. They understand instinctively that Pharaoh should be disobeyed, and they act. I think it's important to quote the rest of her commentary as she says, ultimately, these women's defiance demeans the male tyrant. Thus, from these women, filled with a power rooted in moral reason, an ethical concern for life, and the capacity to empathize, we learn a valuable lesson in political ethics. All of us in society can contribute to liberation by judiciously engaging in acts of civil disobedience. Even when we don't believe we have power, we do. The headlines coming out of their society had to have been so much worse than ours, not that we're comparing, but they knew what they had to do to take control, and they did it. And even in a world that felt like it was falling apart, they recognized that it was time to step up in order to create the world that they wanted to live in. I doubt it's coincidence that Martin Luther King Day falls when we read the Exodus story. It happens every year. And isn't this also what the civil rights movement was about? Isn't this what Dr. King preached? Justice, freedom, equal rights? These are Jewish values. These are human values. And on Sunday, we are celebrating them. The Coalition for Black and Jewish Unity is sponsoring a special musical celebration of the dream at the First Baptist Institutional Church in Detroit at 2 o'clock. And you know it's also a Jewish event because it actually starts with lunch at noon. I hope you will consider attending. And there's information about it in the messenger, or you can just ask me about it after services. And Temple Israel's Anti-Racism Task Force has 3 programs planned in the month of February, which is Black History Month. A book discussion of the novel Horse by Geraldine Brooks. A review of the Women of Reform Judaism's civil rights journey that took place last October, and it is going to be led by 2 of our members who went on the trip, along with a tour of the Charles Wright Museum of African American History. Jews have been fighting for freedom for all people since the beginning of time. And Shiphrah and Puah, the midwives, are a model for us on just how important it is, as if our lives depended on it, because in fact, they do. Consider for yourself how you can take back control despite everything that's going on in the world. When things feel so desperate, it's easy to become paralyzed. But one thing I do know is what Dr. King said is true. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. There's so much out there that does matter. And we can't just let it pass us by without responding. We must step up. We must speak out. We must get involved with all of these programs. We must take back control. That's what I'm going to do. And I hope you will join me so that together we will create the world that we want to live in. Shabbat Shalom.